Welcome back to another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm your host, Stephen Roy Goodman. I'm here in Hargeysa, Somaliland, where we're going to be speaking about the history and culture of Somaliland. And I have with me today two guests. Musse, who is the director of the Cultural Center of Hargeysa, and Lee Cassanelli, who is a retired professor from the University of Pennsylvania who's written extensively about the Horn of Africa. Welcome.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to the Hargeysa Cultural Center, of both of you, because of art and culture gives the strong message to the world of where we are. That's why we choose today here at the Hargeysa Cultural Center. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And if maybe we can move, I'm glad you welcomed us, but maybe if we can, I wanted to ask a very specific question of Lee, because Lee and I have both spent a lot of time in Philadelphia and both spent a lot of time in Africa. And I suppose the first question, and I don't think it's a crazy one, is why is this region important and why should more Americans pay attention to this region?
Well, I'm happy you're here with me at the same time in Somaliland. I've come here several times to do research and mentor students and work with my colleagues. As you've already discovered probably, Somaliland is an unusual and interesting country. It's a country where, which has a long history of interaction with the wider world through these famous trade in frankincense and myrrh. It has archaeological sites that date back 3,000 to 4,000 years, and yet it's virtually unknown to the outside world. It's also a country which is an Islamic society whose population hungers for Western education. It's a country which is relatively poor, but is one of the world's largest exporters of livestock on the hoof, camels, sheep, and goats, mainly to the Middle East. Very famous for that. It's predominantly a rural pastoral society, although it's changing, and yet it now has a large capital city here that's over 2 million people. It's famous for its oral culture, its oral history, its oral poetry, its traveling troops of people who make plays. Somalis love oral culture. It's part of the nomadic way of life. And yet it hosts an annual international book fair that attracts writers from all over the continent. I hope Jama will talk more about that. If you look at the infrastructure here, apart from the area around Hargeysa in the Berbera-Hargeysa corridor that takes goods into Ethiopia, the physical infrastructure is quite limited, and some of the roads are very bad. On the other hand, 85% of Somalilanders are on mobile banking, use mobile money banking. So they're connected in ways, even if you can't get there physically all the time, you're there in the economic system. You can participate in the economy. And the last thing I would say, Steve, is that observers who come here acknowledge and recognize that this is a politically stable, democratic country. It's safe, it's secure, and it has been self-governing since 1990. And yet, ironically, most of the world does not officially recognize Somaliland as an independent country. Israel was the first UN member to recognize Somaliland just a few months ago in December of 2025. So it's kind of a paradox, a country that works and has a deep history and a very energetic and educated population, and yet it hasn't acquired recognition. So that's something maybe we can talk about.
Well, actually, if we can talk about that paradox, and maybe I can throw this to both of you, because I have noticed all these paradoxes where you talked about the rural areas, but then everybody's on these very modern phones. Maybe Jama, do you agree with that issue of the paradox, or are we just dreaming this from an American perspective?
No, actually, this is a paradox. It's a paradox because of, even what Lee was saying about it's a poor country, but it's a country that feels so rich inside when it comes to culture, oral history, and so on. So people who feel proud and feel rich inside, not on the wealth side only. And when you hear what's happening in the Western, or in general in the media, when you come to the word Somali, before you come to Somaliland, Somalia, Somali state of Ethiopia, the word Somali gives you a message. Problems, terrorism, parts in the world, in the sea, hunger, all the things that somehow Somaliland is safe from it. And that message is not going through. And one of the paradoxes is that because of the space, the region where we find ourselves, the good news doesn't make news. We have people here, like 11,000 people who attended at the Hargeysa International Book Fair, where you have almost 70% of these people, young people, who are hungry for reading and writing and listening poetry like rock stars. So when you have a rock star singing in somewhere in the Western countries, but that doesn't make news. What makes news is the bad thing. So the paradox is coming also the fact that not only American audience, to which we are talking today, but the rest of the world know really less about Somaliland. And that is also affecting the political aspect, that the world, in order to recognize, they have to know you. That's why not only the Hargeysa International Book Fair, but this place where we are, it became a kind of acting as a cultural diplomacy for Somaliland to tell to the world what is happening in this place. Not only, but also to give young Somalilanders to know what's happening in the world. They can't travel because if they don't have a valid passport, because they are not recognized internationally. So we want to bring the world to the young people of Somaliland so they are connected. So the paradox is actually the first problem causing the paradox itself is because of people have no clue idea what's happening in this part of the world. And that's why we have to tell what's happening. And thank you for coming and telling this to the world.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for having us. And maybe if we can continue on that point about the paradox, because I think that's an important point. Lee, from an American perspective, what would you do in your mind? You've spent a lot of time here. You write extensively about the Horn of Africa. You've written 2 books about this region. What more would you like people to know about the region, and how could it connect more to young people in Somaliland to young people in the United States?
There are a lot of educational institutions here, some good, some not so good, but everyone wants an education, a Western education, along with their Islamic schooling. You know, it's a country that's very cosmopolitan in that way, religiously and educationally. But in terms of what Americans ought to know, Somaliland usually comes to the attention of the Western world when there are strategic or military concerns from the whole area. If you see where Berbera is located, it's an very old port. It goes back to ancient times, really. Now it's become one of the major ports on the Gulf of Aden, and it's an outlet for most of Ethiopia, a lot of Ethiopia's trade, which also trades with Djibouti. And it's provided a lot of economic energy and activity. But Berbera is also now strategically important to protect the Bab el-Mandeb Straits to the Red Sea. It's one of the few I guess you'd call it safe and secure ports, and it's been growing. It's got big investment has big investment, almost $500 million from the United Arab Emirates to improve the port. And so the port itself has been attractive to people going back to the Cold War era. You know, the Americans were interested, the Soviets were there for a while. Now the Emirates are interested in it, and I think Israel probably has an interest in having some kind of military presence. Ethiopia has signed a memorandum of agreement, which is still not quite fully realized, to exchange a military presence on the Somaliland coast in exchange for possible recognition. Now, this is very tricky. All of this is tricky, but Berbera has become part of the new geopolitical map of the region, given the instability and the conflict of many of the surrounding countries. So this is why Somaliland should be is and should be of importance not only to American policymakers but to anybody who studies the geopolitics of the Horn of Africa.
But this is interesting because of I think the contemporary history is connecting to the past.
Right.
Had Berbera was mentioned at the 1st century.
Yes, right. Yeah.
And when the peoples of Eritrean Sea, the anonymous manuscript has been found, the only place that has been mentioned in this today's Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb was Berbera and Zeila, of course. So these were the main ports. And that was important geopolitically at that time. And it again, our strength, but also our problem was whether it's 1960s, 1970s, and now, that's where we are located, where Berbera is located. The Russians came when the world was bipolarized, and they built. And then Americans came and outsided the Russians because of Berbera was so strategic place. And then everyone left. One problem with Somalia happened. And again today, because of Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea and Gulf of Berbera, as I want to call, because that was the name of the, rather than Gulf of Aden, which is a political name that has been given. But the Gulf of Berbera was so important and still become crucially important. The DP world of the United Arab Emirates invested, as Lee was saying, $500 million to extend the port. But also the British government invested with the public money in Berbera recently because of that trust that Berbera gave. So it's our burden because of when there is a conflict, when there is a sort of any problem, but it's also our strength because of you can't. I don't know if there is any important table in discussion today in the world where Berbera is not, or in Somaliland, was not somehow under discussion because of this new latest war that happened in the Gulf.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more. And I hope you guys don't mind me pushing on this exact point a little bit. What would happen tomorrow, in your opinion, in both of your opinions, if the United States were to recognize Somaliland as an independent state? How would that change tomorrow morning? What would change tomorrow morning?
I think everything will change. And of course, positive for Somaliland, but in my opinion, positive also for the entire world. We are talking about a democracy that exists as a spot in a very troubled area where there is the only democracy today, that in the sense of we understand what this means, democracy, a multi-party system, and where people choose who to govern, who to rule. So as of today, there are so many forms of government, but that democratic values prove it the only one that can function. And Somaliland is a proof of that. So recognizing Somaliland would one more time tell to the world the direction that we have to go if we want to have a better future and better humanity for this world. Second, because we will be more secure. Somaliland, with all its weaknesses in terms of lack of resources, anyway protected from piracy, from terrorism, from even looting in the sea and illegal fishing, but with its resources. If recognized and sit on the tables that count, then it will control more and means that we'll have more stable region. The third and last point is a Bab el-Mandeb. We know what's happening today in the world. The cost of the petroleum or the cost of the energy became at the level that you cannot imagine, and Hargeysa is being really felt by that problem. If that place is secure, that means the world have a control on the most important water of the entire globe. So we would have more protection, more security, but one more voice that's voicing for the stability and for the security and for democracy. So the world will change positively, in my opinion.
Okay, well, let me add, as a student of diplomatic history as well in the Horn of Africa, I want to just raise the question about why more countries haven't seen all of these points. And one reason has to do with the history of the continent as a whole. And at the time of African countries' independence, there was an agreement that people would not tamper with the boundaries that were inherited from the colonial era. For better or worse, those boundaries were artificially drawn up in the late 19th century. The Somali people today live in 5 different countries. Somali-speaking people live in Somaliland, Somalia, parts of Kenya, parts of Ethiopia, and parts of Djibouti. So the Somali nation has been partitioned. And that's unfortunate for self-determination and for unity, but African leaders in general have said, we don't want to tamper with the boundaries. It'll open up Pandora's box of secessionist movements. The reality is, though, Somaliland was a former British protectorate, which gained its independence 5 days before Italian Somalia became independent. What we call Somalia today was an Italian colony. And the two voluntarily made a union. Some people say it wasn't really ratified properly and so on, but Somaliland was, for 5 days, an independent country recognized by the UN and by all the Security Council permanent members. So it has a reality. And what in 1991, I guess, its leaders proclaimed they were going to reclaim their sovereignty because the union had not worked out. Somalilanders were victims in many ways of their own government in some brutal repression of activism and so on. So Somaliland is saying, we are not altering the colonial boundaries in any way. We're not violating the African Union Charter. We are simply reasserting our right to self-government as a sovereign country. And so that's where the argument is. But many African countries and a lot of Western countries follow the lead of the African Union, which says we recognize only one Somalia, because there was only one Somalia from 1960 to 1990. But now, for 35 years, longer than that time, Somaliland has been an independent, self-governing country. So there are a lot of tricky legal issues here, but it seems to me clear from a historian's point of view that we have to. It's an old legacy of the African Union, and it's time now, in a new geopolitical age and a new era of pragmatism, to rethink that and say Somaliland has demonstrated it has a population, a stable, boundaries, recognized boundaries, and the ability to govern itself and to conduct foreign policy, which it's doing informally in many ways. Those are the criteria for recognizing an independent state. So I just want to put that out there. But there are obstacles and hesitance and resistance and reluctance because of the past commitment of African countries and those who want to follow what the African Union says to not tamper with boundaries.
But the dilemma is exactly that. Somaliland is exactly what he's saying. Yeah. And the dilemma that people who are opposing Somaliland should answer and have is that Somaliland is claiming what 1884 has been done in terms of boundaries has been divided. So that's, contradiction. The decision in the African Union table is that contradicting themselves because of it is one more now. But I think the important is that Somaliland, the recognition that came in 25th December of last year from State of Israel is not something that Somalilanders were waiting 35 years or 34 years, as people say. It is 61 years that people are waiting, because of immediately in 1960, when that union has been felt that was fabricated and was not working, immediately Somalilanders tried to break that direction. Yeah. And in 1961, there was a coup that they tried to get back what Somaliland used to be 6 days before, as Lee was saying. So these people were working hard to get it where we are today after 61 years, not 31 years or 34 years. So first of all, that's one thing that should be tell to the world. And the other thing is, and the reason probably why we are in a cultural center to having this conversation, is the issue of identity. Today, we have 72% of the people less than 30 years old. And among those, 82% of the population is less than 25 years old. So we have a young generation. We have a people who was born, bred, grown Somaliland. So they don't have clue idea what existed before, what we call it when there was a union in Somalia. So building and giving an identity to those young people is the most crucial thing of state building that Somaliland had. And the reason why we are here and it's becoming important is when you have a state building process that doesn't consider art and culture and history in their state building, what happened? What happened is that what I call you lose what makes the human being humane. So you lose the humanity. The young people who are growing in a nation where they don't feel to have the history, their own identity, because it has been falsified by the international media, by those who talk about the one Somalia, found themselves in a difficult situation to grow. And you lose the humanity, you lose what makes the human being humane because of they don't have where to lie behind, where to stay and be proud of. That's why for us, really having, building not false or fabricated identity, but the real identity that Somaliland used to have since, as I mentioned, the first century, is important and it's becoming fundamental. And that's why I think, the direction that we are going is the right one. And even if it takes longer time, whether it's 34 years or whether it's 64 years, it will never be too long to take this direction to the Somaliland.
Well, that's a fair point. In your opinion, since you run this cultural center, what do you think the main cultural aspects of Somaliland are? If you were saying that to an outside audience, if you had to say these are the 2 or 3 main things that make Somalilanders different, or as you just said a moment ago, proud.
We are sitting in the capital of the Republic of Somaliland, the city of Hargeysa. And this city was known, and it is named the mother of modern Somali art. So this is a well-known and documented, which means in 1940s and 50s when the new modern way of art performance, mainly the music. Here behind we have oud, which is one of the most important, cultural element that we have in terms of music, was born here. So the music and the modern music of Somali people started here. The second point Lee was mentioning, they have the oral culture, and most importantly, oral poetry is so much rooted in this society. Of course, shared with the Somali people, but in Somaliland in particular, is another thing that Somalilanders are so proud of. If we had some of the sessions of the Hargeysa International Book Fair, and there is a poet who is performing, you would see 3,000-4,000 young people who would grab, but there is no seat anymore, on the tree just to listen, how they appreciate it. So this is an identity that no one else shared with Somaliland. So it's fundamental to that from orality, from oral culture, from oral histories, that we deep found the roots of this society. And of course, I mentioned the music. So this is art forms that, which is the culture of this society. Yeah. We have one of the most important caves in Africa. It's called el-Mandeb. It's the archaeologists say between 4,000 to 7,000, some of them years old. And this is agreed by the archaeologists, by the historians, by anyone who visited there, that this is a World Heritage Site. But this site, recognized as a World Heritage Site, UNESCO is not recognizing because Somaliland is not a recognized country. And who is losing? This is a humanity that is losing such important thing rather than claiming that Somaliland is not recognized. So today what Somaliland has, what Somaliland offers to the world is not only the tourist attraction that is happening already in an unrecognized country, but also places like Lasgale where, so, as you were mentioning, Somaliland scholars like Dr. Sada Mire, who is an archaeologist and the only archaeologist professional that we have in this part, and now she's teaching at the UCL in the UK. She discovered so many other important sites that has been documented now. So Somaliland scholars who are coming back after they were educated, they are contributing also from that perspective. So I think this sense of belonging and to bring back something positive is happening from the science, from the research, but also from the beautiful cafe. I love cafe because of my exactly, and helping and coming back to Somaliland to contribute with something substantial.
Well, if we can move physically to see some of these contributions in the center. Would you mind showing me a little bit about where we are? Can we physically walk?
Yeah, absolutely. And to link what we were saying exactly about how important is that geopolitically in Somaliland, I want to show you Berbera corridor that has been mentioned. It is not something that just started in, let us say, 10 years ago when Berbera corridor was being started, or 7 years ago when it has been. But here we have a map of 1904, if I'm not wrong. I will be precise when I'm close to. And this map is the first concept of Berbera corridor, because of in 1904 the British colonial office, of course, at that time wanted to connect the Berbera and Harar railway and to build that important passage, which was, of course, important because of the transport, because of serving the entire population of Ethiopia through from Berbera. So it is a detailed map where you have where the railway would pass. But for me, as a cultural center, it's more important the date because of the information that we have here. But today sadly disappeared because of the name of the worlds, the names of the toponyms, the name of where tribes lived, how the nomads moved from one part to the other part of the country. And in a well-detailed map, it's not available anymore in any place. So it's important, and one more time, how Berbera was geopolitically important in the past, in the first century, but also in early late 1800, and today of Somaliland. And similarly, you mentioned what could be culturally proud Somalilanders. Here we have, we were talking about orality, how the oral society of this population are fundamental. But here we have some manuscripts, Islamic manuscripts, written in 1838 and handwritten, and so with so important information, a lot of information about what was happening in the coastal area, again from Berbera to Zayla to Harar, because of scholars who wrote these manuscripts, who penned these manuscripts, were Islamic Muslim scholars, indigenous, not people who came from outside. And this is proved because of, you would see this is written in Arabic calligraphy. So the content is a well-known Islamic book. But at some point, the scholar who is writing finishes his Arabic vocabulary, and he continued writing Somali while using the Arabic calligraphy. So that proves that the person who wrote knew more Somali in terms of language than Arabic, which means he was a Somalilander. I say he because at that time of the men in the Islamic scholar, there were men who were writing. So it's absolutely fundamental part of the history that we wanted to give to the young people to be part of this identity and this rooted and fundamental historical place that they are living.
Well, thank you very much for sharing all this information about this beautiful cultural center here in Hargeysa, Somaliland. If you would like to send a note to me at the show, please go ahead and do so by sending an email to highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. And thank you again for watching. I'm your host, Stephen Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.